The ice crystals that formed on Zara Nightwhisper's breath dissipated into the thin atmosphere of Nyx, 7, each exhale a small cloud of vapor that caught the pale light of the planet's twin suns. Her crystalline blue skin seemed to merge with the frozen landscape around her, an evolutionary adaptation that made her people, the Velthari, perfect hunters in Arctic environments. Silver hair cascaded down her back like liquid mercury, braided with small ice fragments that chimed softly as she moved through the abandoned human settlement. Her orders were simple: eliminate any remaining human survivors and gather intelligence on their operations. The war between the Velthari Confederation and the Human Colonial Alliance had been raging for 3 cycles now, each side convinced of their moral superiority. Zara had never questioned the righteousness of their cause. Humans were cold, calculating creatures who strip-mined planets and left ecological devastation in their wake. They were incapable of true emotion, driven only by greed and expansion. At least, that's what she had always believed. The settlement stretched before her like a graveyard of metal and glass, its structures half buried in snow drifts that had accumulated over the months since the evacuation. Prefabricated buildings stood at odd angles, their solar panels cracked and useless. The wind howled through broken windows, creating an eerie symphony that made her heightened senses prickle with unease. Zara moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her footsteps silent on the frozen ground. Her plasma rifle hung at her side, its energy core humming with lethal potential. She had been tracking human heat signatures for days, but they always seemed to vanish just as she closed in. These particular humans were clever, she had to admit. They knew the terrain, knew how to hide. But not well enough. A glint of metal caught her eye near what appeared to be a communications array. She approached cautiously, her rifle ready. The structure was damaged, its dish antenna bent at an impossible angle, but the control room beneath it seemed intact. She descended the metal stairs, her boots clanging against the frozen rungs. Inside, the air was warmer, heated by residual power from a backup generator that hummed in the corner. Banks of monitors lined the walls, most of them dark, but a few still flickered with static. She began her methodical search, looking for data cores or communication logs that might reveal human plans. That's when she found it. Wedged between 2 server units was a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn and stained, as if it had been handled countless times. Zara picked it up, expecting to find tactical information or supply manifests. Instead, she discovered something that would shatter everything she thought she knew about humanity. The first page was written in neat, careful script, property of David Thorne. If found, please return to Luna Station, Sector 7. Tell them I tried to come home. Zara's elongated fingers traced the words. The handwriting was oddly beautiful, each letter formed with an artistic precision that spoke of care and intention. She had expected human writing to be crude, utilitarian. This looked like poetry. She turned the page and began to read. Day 47 on Nyx, 7. The ice storms have been getting worse, but there's something beautiful about the way the light catches the crystals in the air. It reminds me of the snow globes Emma used to collect. I wonder if she still has them, if she still shakes them and watches the fake snow fall while thinking of faraway places. I hope she's not thinking of this place. I hope she's warm and safe and laughing at something stupid I said in my last letter. Zara's breath caught. Emma. A name, spoken with such tenderness that it seemed to warm the cold air around her. She had never heard a human speak of another with such obvious affection. Her training had taught her that humans formed alliances based on mutual benefit, not emotional attachment. She read on, drawn by curiosity she couldn't explain. Day 52. Found a patch of ice flowers growing near the thermal vents. They're incredibly beautiful, almost alien in their perfection. I know that sounds strange, considering where I am, but there's something about the way they grow in perfect spirals that reminds me of the galaxy Emma and I used to watch through the telescope on her apartment balcony. I pressed one between these pages. Maybe someday I'll show it to her, tell her about the impossible beauty that exists even in the most desolate places. Zara's fingers found the pressed flower, its delicate petals preserved between the pages like a frozen moment in time. The ice flower was a species native to her own homeworld, one that her people considered sacred. That a human had found beauty in it, had preserved it with such care, sent an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. She continued reading, page after page of David's observations. He wrote about the aurora that painted the sky in shades of green and blue, about the way the ice sang in the wind, about his dreams of home. But more than anything, he wrote about Emma. Day 78. I dream about her laugh last night. It's strange how memory works out here. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I can recall every detail of the way she laughed when I tried to cook dinner for our anniversary and nearly set the kitchen on fire. She had this way of covering her mouth when she laughed, like she was trying to contain all that joy, but it would spill out anyway through her eyes. I used to live for that laugh. The journal trembled in Zara's hands. This wasn't the cold calculation of a military mind or the detached observations of a scientist. This was raw emotion, laid bare on the page. David wrote about missing Emma's morning coffee ritual, about the way she hummed while she worked, about the small scar on her hand from a childhood accident and how he would trace it with his finger while they talked. Day 95. I think about what I'll say to her when I get home. How do you explain what it's like to live in a world of ice and silence? How do you describe the way loneliness becomes a physical thing, something you carry in your chest like a stone? I think I'll just hold her for a while first. Words can wait. Zara's crystalline skin felt warm, an impossibility in the frozen communications room. She had never experienced anything like the emotions David described. Velthari society valued efficiency and purpose. They formed bonds based on genetic compatibility and shared goals. But this was something else entirely. She turned to a section where David had attempted to draw. His artistic skills were limited, but his subjects were clear. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, rendered with the careful attention of someone trying to capture a cherished memory. Beneath the sketch, he had written, Emma on the day I proposed. She said yes before I could finish the question. I was so nervous I dropped the ring in the sand, and we spent 20 minutes looking for it while she laughed and told me she would have said yes to a piece of sea glass. The concept of marriage was foreign to the Velthari. They understood breeding contracts and resource-sharing agreements, but the idea of choosing a partner based on emotional connection, of making promises about an uncertain future, was incomprehensible to their logical minds. Yet as Zara read David's words, she began to understand. This wasn't about logic or efficiency. It was about choice, about deciding that someone else's happiness was worth more than your own comfort. It was about finding beauty in imperfection and strength in vulnerability. Day 134. Emergency protocols have been activated. We're being evacuated tomorrow. I wanted to stay and finish the atmospheric readings, but Colonel Hayes says the Velthari have been spotted in the sector. I wonder what they're like, these aliens who've been hunting us across the galaxy. I imagine they're efficient, deadly, probably beautiful in their own terrifying way. I hope they're not completely without mercy. I hope they understand that we're not so different from them. We're just trying to survive, trying to find a place to call home. The entry was dated 2 weeks ago. Zara realized with a start that David might have been writing this when her own ship had entered the system. She had been the hunter he was worried about, the alien he had imagined with a mixture of fear and curious respect. The final entry was shorter, written in a hand that seemed to shake with exhaustion or emotion. Day 142. The transport leaves in an hour. I'm leaving this journal here, in case I don't make it home. If someone finds this, please know that we tried to be good. We tried to respect this place, to learn from it. We're not the monsters our enemies think we are. We love, we dream, we hope. We're just trying to find our way in a universe that seems determined to tear us apart. Tell Emma I never forgot her laugh. Tell her I carried it with me through the ice and the silence, and it kept me warm when nothing else could. Zara closed the journal, her hands trembling. She sat in the silence of the communications room, surrounded by the detritus of human occupation, but all she could think about was David's words. The raw honesty, the depth of emotion, the beautiful way he saw the world even in the midst of war and isolation. She had come here to hunt humans, to eliminate them as efficiently as possible. But now she found herself wondering about David, about whether he had made it home to Emma, about whether they had found each other again across the vast emptiness of space. The generator hummed in the corner, its rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat in the frozen room. Zara pulled out her communication device, ready to report her findings to the Velfari command. Her orders were clear: any human technology or intelligence was to be transmitted immediately. But as she looked at the journal in her hands, she hesitated. This wasn't military intelligence. This was something else, something precious and fragile and utterly human. To turn it over to her superiors would be to reduce David's love to data points, to transform his beautiful words into tactical advantages. She thought about the ice flower pressed between the pages, about the way David had seen beauty in something her own people held sacred. She thought about Emma, somewhere among the stars, possibly still waiting for the man who had loved her enough to carry her memory across the frozen wastes of an alien world. For the first time in her life, Zara Nightwhisper made a choice that had nothing to do with efficiency or duty. She slipped the journal inside her armor, close to her heart, and stood to leave the communications room. Behind her, the monitors flickered with static, but she didn't look back. She had a mission to complete, a war to fight, but something fundamental had changed in the frozen depths of Nix 7. The ice around her heart had begun to crack, and through those fissures, something warm and unfamiliar was beginning to grow. As she stepped back into the howling wind, Zara wondered if this was what David had meant when he wrote about hope. It felt fragile and dangerous, like a flame that could be extinguished by the slightest breeze. But it also felt necessary, like something she had been missing her entire life without knowing it. The hunt would continue, but the hunter had been forever changed by the discovery of a human heart laid bare in ink and paper, preserved like a flower between the pages of a book that would never be returned to its rightful owner. But perhaps, Zara thought as she disappeared into the swirling snow, that was exactly as it should be. Marcus Reed pressed his palm against the cool glass of the observation dome, watching the alien ship glide silently through the crimson sky of Kepler 442b. The vessel moved with an elegance that human technology had never achieved, its hull shimmering like liquid starlight as it disappeared behind the canopy of towering crystal trees that dominated this section of the planet. For 3 months, he had been alone in Research Station Omega 7, tending to the terraforming project that was supposed to transform this world into humanity's new home. The war had changed everything. His colleagues had been evacuated, the supply ships had stopped coming, and he had been left with a choice: abandon years of work or stay behind and hope the conflict would end before his resources ran out. He had chosen to stay, partly out of dedication to the project, but mostly because he had nowhere else to go. His family was gone, lost in the first wave of attacks on the outer colonies. The research station had become his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the quiet rhythms of growth and cultivation. But lately, he hadn't been as alone as he thought. Marcus moved away from the window and walked through the hydroponics bay, checking on the rows of earth plants that were slowly adapting to the alien soil. Tomatoes grew alongside native phosphorescent moss, their vines intertwining in patterns that seemed almost intentional. The sight never failed to amaze him. Life, it seemed, had its own agenda when it came to finding harmony. He paused at a workstation where several small devices hummed quietly. These were his communication arrays, modified from standard terraforming equipment to pick up alien transmissions. He had been monitoring Velfari communications for weeks now, not to gather intelligence, but to understand them better. Their language was hauntingly beautiful, filled with tonal variations that reminded him of bird songs. More importantly, he had been leaving messages of his own. It had started as an experiment in xenobiology. He had noticed that certain areas where Velfari scouts had been spotted showed unusual plant growth patterns. The alien presence seemed to stimulate the local flora in unexpected ways. As a scientist, he was fascinated. As a human being cut off from his own kind, he was desperate for any form of connection. So he had begun leaving gifts. The first had been simple, a small bouquet of hybrid flowers that he had cultivated, left on a boulder where he had seen movement through his telescopes. The flowers had been gone the next day, though whether taken by the alien scout or destroyed by the wind, he couldn't say. Encouraged, he had tried again, this time leaving a more elaborate arrangement along with a small data pad containing basic mathematical equations and simple diagrams showing the flower's genetic structure. That too had disappeared. Marcus walked to his laboratory and sat down at the main workstation, pulling up the files he had been working on. His latest project was ambitious, perhaps foolishly so. He had been developing a new strain of bioluminescent orchid, one that could survive in Kepler 442b's unique atmospheric conditions. But these weren't just any orchids. He had encoded messages into their genetic structure, using the patterns of their luminescence to create a kind of biological Morse code. The orchids could literally communicate, their petals flashing in sequences that spelled out words in a dozen different languages, including what he had managed to decipher of the Velthari tongue. Each flower was a living letter, a desperate attempt to reach across the void between species. He carefully lifted a mature specimen from its growth chamber. The orchid was breathtaking, its petals shifting through colors that didn't exist in Earth's spectrum. As he watched, it began to pulse with soft light, spelling out the message he had programmed into its DNA, I mean no harm. I want to understand. The words repeated in English, Mandarin, Spanish, and then in the musical tones he believed might be Velthari. It was probably wrong, probably meaningless to an alien mind, but it was the best he could do with limited resources and an abundance of hope. Marcus sealed the orchid in a portable biochamber and gathered his field equipment. He had identified a clearing about 2 kilometers from the station where he had detected regular Velthari activity. It was risky to venture out, but he couldn't keep hiding behind the station's walls if he wanted to make contact. The journey through the crystal forest was surreal. The trees rose hundreds of meters into the sky, their trunks formed from what appeared to be living mineral that sang softly in the wind. Bioluminescent fungi carpeted the forest floor, creating pools of blue and green light that guided his path. This was what Earth could become, he thought, if they stopped fighting long enough to learn from each other. The clearing was exactly as he remembered it, a perfect circle where no crystal trees grew, filled instead with the native grass that rippled like water in the gentle breeze. Marcus placed the biochamber at the center of the clearing and activated the release mechanism. The orchid emerged slowly, its roots finding purchase in the alien soil as its petals began their programmed light show. He was about to retreat to a safe distance when movement at the edge of the clearing caught his eye. A figure emerged from behind one of the crystal trees, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The Velthari scout was nothing like the propaganda images he had seen. Where he had expected a monster, he saw something that could only be described as ethereal. The alien skin had a crystalline quality that seemed to refract the light of the bioluminescent forest, creating patterns that shifted like living art. Long, elegant limbs moved with a dancer's grace, and when the figure turned toward him, Marcus saw eyes that held intelligence and curiosity rather than hostility. The scout was beautiful in a way that transcended species, and Marcus found himself rooted to the spot by wonder rather than fear. The Velthari approached the orchid cautiously, tilting their head as they observed the light patterns. Marcus held his breath, watching as those alien eyes tracked the sequence of flashes. When the message began to repeat in what he hoped was the Velthari language, the scout's entire body went still. For a long moment, they simply stared at the flower. Then, slowly, deliberately, they reached out and touched one of the glowing petals with a fingertip. The contact seemed to send a ripple of light through the orchid's entire structure, and the alien jerked their hand back as if surprised. Marcus took a careful step forward, his hands raised to show he meant no threat. The scout's attention snapped to him, and for an instant, he thought they might flee. Instead, they straightened and spoke a single word in their musical language. Marcus didn't understand the meaning, but the tone was unmistakably a question. I'm Marcus, he said softly, pointing to himself. Human. I created the flower. For you. The Veltheri tilted their head again, clearly trying to process his words. They spoke again, this time in what sounded like heavily accented English. You make growing light. Marcus's heart raced. They could speak his language, at least partially. Yes, he said, nodding enthusiastically. I made it to talk to you. To say, hello. The scout looked back at the orchid, which continued its gentle light show. When they looked at Marcus again, there was something that might have been wonder in their expression. Why? They asked. It was such a simple question, but it contained the weight of the entire war, the fear and hatred that had driven their species apart. Marcus thought about his empty research station, about the friends he had lost, about the loneliness that had driven him to genetic engineering just to have someone to talk to. Because, he said finally, I think we're more alike than different. And I think this planet is big enough for both of us. The Veltheri was quiet for a long time, studying him with those luminous eyes. Finally, they knelt beside the orchid and spoke a few words in their own language. The flower responded, its light patterns shifting into new configurations that Marcus had never programmed. Somehow, the plant was learning, adapting its message to match the alien speech patterns. Zephyr, the scout said, pointing to themselves. I am Zephyr. Zephyr, Marcus repeated, savoring the sound. It was a beautiful name, one that seemed to capture the grace with which they moved. It's an honor to meet you. Zephyr stood and looked around the clearing, then back at Marcus. Dangerous, they said. Others come. Hunters. Marcus understood. Other Veltheri were in the area, ones who might not be as curious or as willing to communicate. But he also heard something else in Zephyr's voice, concern. They were warning him. Will you come back? Marcus asked. I can make more flowers. Different messages. I can teach you about human plants, if you want. Zephyr considered this, their head tilted in that now familiar gesture. You teach. I teach, they said finally. Exchange. The word sent a thrill through Marcus. Exchange implied trade, cooperation, the foundation of understanding between civilizations. Yes, he said eagerly. Exchange. Zephyr reached into what Marcus now realized was a utility belt and withdrew a small crystal vial filled with what looked like liquid starlight. They held it out to him, and when he took it, he felt warmth spreading through his fingers. Growth water, Zephyr explained in halting English. For your garden. Marcus stared at the vial in wonder. It was a gift, freely given, the first peaceful exchange between human and Veltheri in over a year of war. Thank you, he whispered. Zephyr nodded and turned to go, but they paused at the edge of the clearing. 3 days, they said, holding up 3 long fingers. I return. With more words. Marcus watched them disappear into the crystal forest like a dream made manifest. He looked down at the vial in his hands, then at the orchid still pulsing with its message of peace. The flower had worked better than he had ever dared to hope. As he made his way back to the research station, Marcus's mind raced with possibilities. Zephyr wanted to learn, to exchange knowledge. Perhaps there were others like them, others who saw the futility of endless war and dreamed of something better. That night, he worked feverishly in his laboratory, using Zephyr's gift to cultivate new specimens. The growth water seemed to accelerate plant development while enhancing their natural beauty. Under its influence, his orchids grew larger and brighter, their bioluminescent messages more complex and nuanced. He created an entire garden of communication, each plant encoding different concepts: friendship, curiosity, hope, wonder. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking over the crystal forest, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 3 days, Zephyr had said. 3 days to prepare for the next meeting, to take another step across the bridge they had begun to build. Marcus looked out at the alien sunrise and smiled. For the first time since the war began, he felt like he was part of something larger than survival, something that might actually matter. In the hydroponics bay, the hybrid plants continued their slow dance of adaptation, earth roots intertwining with alien soil in patterns that spoke of harmony rather than conquest. Life, Marcus reflected, always found a way to surprise him. And sometimes, if he was very lucky, it found a way to hope. The electromagnetic storm that raged across the Vega system had been broadcasting static for 6 days straight, scrambling communications between fleets and turning the void between worlds into a cacophony of white noise. But Kira Voss had learned to find music in the chaos. Hunched over her console aboard the civilian transport Wandering Star, she filtered through layers of interference with the patience of someone who had spent her entire adult life coaxing meaning from the spaces between words. As the ship's communications officer, she was responsible for maintaining contact with the refugee convoy, but the storm had made that nearly impossible. What she hadn't expected was to intercept something beautiful. The signal came through at 0300 hours, buried beneath 17 layers of stellar interference and encrypted in a pattern that made her fingers pause over her keyboard. It wasn't human. The mathematical structure was too elegant, too organic, flowing like poetry written in numbers. After 3 hours of careful decryption, she finally cracked the code. It was a message from a Veltheri ship, but not a military transmission. It was personal, intimate, meant for someone who would never receive it. To the whisper of starlight that haunts my dreams, it began, I write these words into the void knowing they will never reach you. The war has taken us to opposite ends of the galaxy, and I fear that by the time it ends, we will be strangers to each other. Do you still remember the way the aurora danced over our homeworld's ice seas? Do you still sing the song of the crystal winds? Kira stared at the translation on her screen, her heart racing. This wasn't the cold tactical communication she expected from the enemy. This was a love letter, achingly beautiful and desperately sad. Someone out there in the vast emptiness was sending messages to a lover they might never see again, broadcasting their loneliness to the uncaring stars. She shouldn't respond. Every regulation, every bit of common sense told her to log the intercept and move on. But as she read the alien's words, she thought about her own loneliness, about the way the war had scattered humanity like seeds on a cosmic wind, leaving people like her drifting between worlds with no home to return to. Before she could stop herself, she began to type. To the voice that reaches across the void, she wrote, encrypting her response in the same elegant pattern, your words have found an unexpected harbor. I don't know who you're trying to reach, but your message has touched a human heart. We are not so different, you and I. We both know what it means to love someone beyond the reach of space and time. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the transmission key. This could be treason. This could get her court-martialed, or worse. But the loneliness in the alien's message called to something deep within her, something that had been dormant since her own fiancé had been lost in the opening days of the war. She pressed send. The response came 12 hours later, buried in a burst of cosmic radiation that nearly masked it entirely. Kira's hands shook as she decoded it. Human voice in the darkness, your words have shattered my isolation like light breaking through storm clouds. I am called Stellan, and I write from the deep reaches where the stars grow cold and distant. You speak of touching a human heart, but know that your kindness has reached something equally vulnerable in me. Tell me, voice across the void, what is it like to love someone you cannot hold? Kira found herself crying without knowing why. She had expected anger, suspicion, maybe confusion. She hadn't expected this raw honesty, this willingness to share pain with a stranger from an enemy species. Over the following days, as the wandering star drifted through the storm, Kira and Stellan exchanged messages that grew longer and more personal with each transmission. She told him about Earth, about the way rain felt on skin and how seasons changed the world from green to gold to white. She described the ritual of morning coffee, the comfort of familiar music, the way humans gathered in groups to share stories and laughter. In return, Stellan painted pictures of Veltheri culture that contradicted everything she had been told about their species. He wrote about harmony circles where his people sang together in frequencies that could heal both body and spirit. He described crystal gardens that grew in perfect mathematical spirals, living art that took centuries to mature. He told her about the concept of soul threading, a Velthari belief that certain individuals were connected across time and space by invisible bonds that transcended physical form. I begin to think, he wrote in one message, that soul threading is not limited to my own species. How else can I explain the way your words fit into the empty spaces of my thoughts, as if you were always meant to find me in this vast darkness? Kira read that message 17 times before responding, each reading making her chest feel tighter with an emotion she couldn't name. She was falling in love with words on a screen, with a voice across the void, with someone she would never be able to touch. Maybe, she wrote back, the universe has its own plans that were too small to understand. Maybe wars and distances are just obstacles placed in the path of something greater. I dream about you sometimes, Stellan, though I don't know what you look like. In my dreams, you're made of starlight and music, and when you speak, the words feel like coming home. Their correspondence continued for weeks as the wandering star made its slow way toward the Centauri system. Kira learned about Stellan's life as a deep space navigator, mapping routes through uncharted regions where space itself seemed to breathe with alien life. He was a poet and a philosopher as much as he was a soldier, someone who saw beauty in the mathematical elegance of orbital mechanics and found wonder in the songs that pulsars sang across the cosmic void. She told him about her own dreams of exploration, about the career in xenoarchaeology she had abandoned when the war began, about her fascination with the ruins of ancient civilizations and the stories they left behind. She described the way human music worked, how it could move people to tears or joy or fury without any logical explanation. Your species creates beauty without purpose, Stellan wrote in response. This concept of art for art's sake is foreign to us, but there is something magnificent in it. The idea that you can create something simply because it brings joy, not because it serves a function, speaks to a kind of freedom that we have never known. But as their relationship deepened, the reality of their situation became harder to ignore. The electromagnetic storm was finally beginning to dissipate, which meant normal communications would resume soon. Military transmissions would once again fill the void between ships, and their private channel would become impossible to maintain. I know this cannot last, Stellan wrote in what they both understood might be one of their final exchanges. Soon your convoy will reach safe harbor, and I will return to the deep routes where my people need me to guide them through the darkness. But I want you to know that these weeks have been the most alive I have felt since the war began. You have given me something I thought was lost forever, hope that there might be beauty left in the universe. Kira stared at the message through tears she didn't try to hide. Around her, the communications bay hummed with the familiar sounds of a ship in deep space, but all she could think about was the voice that had reached across impossible distance to touch her heart. I don't want to say goodbye, she typed, her fingers trembling on the keys. But if this is goodbye, then I want you to know that you've changed me. I used to think love required proximity, physical presence, shared experiences. You've taught me that connection can transcend space and species, that two souls can recognize each other even when they've never met. Whatever happens in this war, wherever your journeys take you, know that somewhere in the galaxy, a human woman carries the memory of your words like a sacred trust. She paused, then added, P.S., I'm attaching something called music. It's a piece by a composer named Debussy, about moonlight reflecting on water. It makes me think of the way starlight must look on your homeworld's ice seas. Maybe when you hear it, you'll remember that beauty exists in the spaces between worlds, in the places where different kinds of life touch and create something new. The response came 3 hours later, just as the storm's final waves were dissipating into the cosmic background radiation. Kira of the human heart, your gift moves through me like liquid starlight. We have no word in my language for what this music makes me feel, but I think it might be what you call wonder. I am encoding my own gift for you, a mathematical sequence that describes the way my homeworld's aurora dances across the ice. If you trace the numbers on any surface, you will see the pattern that has brought me comfort in the darkest reaches of space. When you look at it, remember that somewhere among the deep routes, a Velthari navigator carries the sound of human laughter in his heart like a beacon guiding him home. The message ended with coordinates, a set of stellar positions that Kira recognized as a navigational marker. It took her a moment to realize what Stellan had done. He had given her the location of a neutral research station, a place where civilian ships from both sides occasionally stopped for repairs and supplies. It wasn't an invitation, exactly. It was something more fragile than that, more precious. It was a possibility. As the wandering star emerged from the electromagnetic storm and normal communications resumed, Kira saved every one of Stellan's messages to her personal storage. She traced the aurora pattern he had sent, watching the mathematical beauty unfold across her tablet screen like living art. The war raged on around them, but in the quiet spaces between duty and despair, Kira began to plan a journey of her own. The refugee convoy would reach safety in another week, and after that, civilian transport crews were allowed to choose their own assignments. She pulled up the stellar charts and traced a route to the coordinates Stellan had given her. It would take months to reach the research station, and there was no guarantee he would be there, no promise that their digital love affair could survive the transition to physical reality. But as she listened to Debussy's Moonlight Sonata echoing through the ship's communications array, she realized that some things were worth the risk. Love, it seemed, was one of them. In the vast darkness between worlds, two souls had found each other through words alone. Now it was time to discover if what they had built in the realm of thought and feeling could take root in the physical universe. The stars stretched ahead like an infinite road, full of danger and wonder and the possibility of dreams coming true. Kira Voss set her course for the unknown, carrying hope like a beacon in her heart, ready to bridge the void between worlds with nothing more than faith and the memory of a voice that had called to her across the cosmic storm.